Alright, so today I'm going to talk about how to armchair diagnose people we don't know on the internet. We're going to do that by burning some stuff. We're going to do that with some ketchup. We're going to do that with some candy and some vitamins. We're going to do that with some more candy. So, the four things we're going to be talking about mostly today is the four things that I've sort of developed that help you diagnose people with mental health conditions who we don't know. This is helpful for really any time you want to say this person may or may not have X clinical disorder. So the first one is maladaptiveness. Next one is isolated incidents. Third one is confirmation bias. And the fourth one is extraordinary circumstances. These four things help us avoid pathologizing too great a portion of the population. If we don't keep these four things in mind, it's really easy to overdiagnose people when it's not appropriate, which leads to a time when the clinical terminology has no more effect if we're just using it for basically everyone. So it's an acronym, MICE, M-I-C-E. So the first one we're going to talk about is maladaptiveness. What this means is how much impairment is this symptom or trait giving the person. We're going to demonstrate this with the ketchup. This is going to be fake blood. So this is our friend here, our unicorn, I guess. He's not going to have a good day today, but he's going to be fairly alright right now. So there are two primary ways a trait can affect someone. Number one, it can just be a minor scratch, or it can cause them to be bleeding out. We want to know about the stuff that's causing them to bleed out. The minor scratches, everyone has all kinds of minor scratches. Everyone has all kinds of minor traits of various mental health disorders. But what we want to know is which of these traits are causing the person to bleed out. Is this trait something more like, if I can find my knife in here, is this trait something more like a little cut there, a little cut there, a little cut there, or a little cut there? Is that what that trait looks like? Or is this trait that we're talking about, that we're saying is a product of a mental health condition, is that trait really more like, I'm probably going to have to take the label off, the seal off first. Hold on. There we go. Is this trait that we're talking about, is it more like that, where the person is actually bleeding out? That's the kind of stuff we're looking for when we're talking about clinical mental health disorders. Is it just a minor scratch, or is the person bleeding out? Is it causing them significant maladaptiveness? Or is the trait significantly maladaptive to impair or inhibit daily activities? And that's what we're looking for in most circumstances when we're talking about mental health criteria. So let's look at some examples. So things that are most likely to be significantly maladaptive or sufficiently maladaptive to warrant clinical health diagnosis. Recurrent suicidal ideation is one. Few to no friends is another. Persistent health problems can be associated with serious mental health problems. Constant failing grades in school, that's pretty significant. Constant self-harm is also pretty significant. Frequent stays at jail can be pretty significant. Highly unstable employment, that's pretty significant. And repeated mental health hospitalizations. All these things are the unicorn bleeding out. And these things, if present in someone you're trying to armchair diagnose as a layperson, those things right here are pretty good indicators that there might actually be something wrong. So now let's look at some examples of cuts and minor bruises and scratches. Becoming physically sick from fears of infidelity. Well, let's actually put that one off to the side for a second. Being super upset about being cheated on. That's pretty normal. It sucks, but it's more of a minor scratch because it's expected from the circumstances. Photogenic house, a house that's extremely well organized. That's probably not sufficiently maladaptive to warrant any kind of diagnosis. Reckless spending these are backwards. So joined a religion, that's not maladaptive, so that would be probably not even considered a cut, really in any circumstance whatsoever, unless they're constantly quitting and joining new religions. Wants to leave prison, we're talking about Chris, someone who wants to leave prison, that is not a trait that would be considered maladaptive in the slightest. So if anything, that would be a minor scratch. Limerent affair. This is a sign of an unhealthy marriage in most cases, but it is not clinically relevant. It's not maladaptive in most cases, because this is actually quite frequent. It's quite common. We wouldn't normally associate this with a mental health disorder because of how common it is and because there are so many other things that can cause it. It really sucks. It can really destroy your life, but it's normal within the confines of marriage. So that's more of a scratch than a mental health trait that would be clinically relevant. Searching Google for what it feels like to be in love. That is not maladaptive. This is not someone who's bleeding out. This might be a slight indicator of some introversion at the most, honestly. It means that you don't spend a lot of time talking about these things with other people in person or in text messages. It means you're looking out at other places to find out what other people experience when they say this is love. It's not clinically significant, okay? Joined an MLM. This is not clinically significant. And then the final one, reckless spending in accordance with the MLM. Yes, this is destructive. This is probably more associated with bleeding out. It's not great at all for your life, but this would not be considered clinically significant because of the context, because you're around all these other people who are doing the exact same thing, and we cannot reasonably conclude that everyone has an innate mental health disorder. So the next one, that was number 1. Now we have to go to number 2. So we just did M, and now we're going to the I in mice. And that stands for isolated incidents or pervasiveness. The next thing we have to do is we have to determine whether or not the traits we're looking for are a single trait, a single instance, or an isolated instance of behavior, or if it's a pattern of behavior that is pervasive. And if you're talking about personality disorders, they have to be pervasive in all areas of life throughout a long period of time. But when you're talking about other disorders, it's not as pervasive. Some disorders, I think, can be diagnosed based on 1 or 2 incidents, but most of them, especially more on the personality disorder side, they all need to be much more pervasive than just 1 or 2 incidents. So the demonstration for this one is we have these 3 items that we're going to put in the water. We're going to get a new cup. And we're going to put water in the cup. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to create a trait, either this, or that is going to be pervasive. We're trying to find something, a trait, that we think is clinically maladaptive, that is going to pervade all areas of a person's life. So the first thing we're going to try is this trait. Let's call this a trait. Let's say this is reckless spending. We're going to ask, is this person engaging in this reckless spending throughout their entire life in all areas of life or not? And if this piece of candy fills the entire thing of water, then that means it is pervasive throughout all aspects of life. But if we just have this one little thing of red and the entire rest of the glass is white and clear, then it is not sufficiently pervasive to warrant diagnosis in most cases. So this does dissolve. I didn't really want it to dissolve. The idea was for it to just be one dot of red in a sea of white. So that's what I'm looking for, but it's not supposed to dissolve. So let's take that guy out, put him over there. I should have brought napkins. And now let's drop in some sprinkles and see if the sprinkles are pervasive or not. Let's see if they can make the entire sea red or not. So all we really have is some stuff on the top, and most of it is, it's sort of kind of getting more clear, but for the most part it's still clear. Or it's starting to get a little bit red, and I wish it was less red, but for the most part it is still clear. So this is not pervasive. I really wish this was more clear, but now we're going to drop in something that is pervasive. Some dye. That's just a little bit in terms of volume. That's the same amount, but as you're going to see with the spoon, that makes the entire glass red. This is a trait that pervades the person's entire life and makes all of the water that color. We have successfully found a pervasive trait. So let's look at some examples. Chris is a psychopath. This is a claim that a lot of people make, even the FBI apparently. So if we're going to say that Chris is a psychopath, we need to, because psychopathy is associated with a personality disorder called antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, because it is a personality disorder that this is associated with, we need to find evidence that enough traits of that personality disorder are pervasive throughout Chris's entire life. If we can't do that, if all the evidence we can find is just after his 33rd birthday, then we have a problem. The pervasiveness is not met. None of those traits can be used to diagnose psychopathy or ASPD, because this type of diagnosis requires pervasiveness. And traits that only appear after the person's 33rd birthday just don't cut it. Even if you find like one or two instances before the 33rd birthday that might be, that's still not enough. You have to have the entire glass beet red, basically. For the most part, not necessarily, but it doesn't need to be beet red, but it needs to be very clear that the entire glass is quite red for you to make that type of diagnosis. So the next one is Chris is a pathological liar. This is a claim that a lot of people make. Is this warranted? Well, pathological lying is something that is pervasive throughout someone's entire life, throughout time, and throughout all aspects of life. So through time and also through like your daily habits. If you're not losing jobs because of lying, if people aren't constantly telling police that, oh, he lies all the time, that's not good for this diagnosis. And if no one has ever said anything bad about him whatsoever, specifically with regards to lying, that's not good either. You would need to find a lot of evidence before his 33rd birthday, before these crimes took place, that he was lying pathologically, that he was lying consistently in all areas of life for basically his entire life. If you can't do that, then this is simply the wrong diagnosis, because you just have a clear glass of water. You do not have the beet red glass of water. Now for the final one, it's probably the most popular. The third claim, Chris is a covert narcissist. So let's look at the three traits of covert narcissism, or really all narcissism. entitlement, exploitation, and empathy impairment. So what you would need to do is find traits consistent with entitlement throughout Chris's entire life, throughout time, and throughout aspects of life. If you can't do that, you just have, let me show you, you have that's what you have. This is what we're looking for. So with entitlement, if all the evidence is only after his 33rd birthday, then that's what you have. If all the evidence of exploitation happens after his 33rd birthday, this is what you've got. That's not good enough. If you have evidence of empathy impairment that only occurs after his 33rd birthday, this is all you've got. You can even add in some more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You still don't have a beet red glass, and you need the beet red glass. And yeah, it's going to dissolve, but whatever. I didn't design those. But you get the point. It needs to be pervasive for this kind of diagnosis. Narcissism is personality for the most part in most circles. It needs to be pervasive through time and aspects of life. Like I said, there are other diagnoses that aren't like that you only need like 1 or 2 instances of, or it can just occur in a small period of time. Like, depression is one key example. Like this can be as an on or off type of thing. But narcissism, that's not an on or off type of thing. That's either you are for an extended period of time, for years and years and years, usually for your entire life, or you're not. And that's because this is something that most people believe, most researchers believe, develops in early childhood. It's an attachment trauma. It's a coping mechanism that deals with attachment trauma. And that's something that happens very early in childhood. So when you only see these symptoms pop up at age 33, that's a serious problem. So now, the third one, confirmation bias. This is the fun one. So when we are doing an investigation, this is going to kind of venture off into the investigation aspect of this, not necessarily mental health diagnostics, just because that's the examples that I came up with. But when we're doing an investigation, whether it's for mental health or if it's for a criminal investigation, everyone is susceptible to confirmation bias. And we probably already know what that means, but I'm going to do a demonstration. These are vitamins. These are pieces of evidence that we don't like, that we don't want. Just ignore the ketchup. That doesn't mean anything. Now we have 6 pieces of evidence that we do like. These Snicker bars. I'm going to throw those in there. Scatter them out. So what a lot of people do is they look at the whole picture, they look at everything, and they say, oh, that, I like that. I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to collect that and put that in my basket. I like that right there. I'm going to put that in my basket. This right here, this looks interesting, but you know what? I don't really like that. But I do like this. You get the idea. So what we want to do as armchair diagnosticians, or as armchair detectives or investigators, or whatever you want to call it, is we want to put on a blindfold. I don't have a blindfold, but this will have to do. So what we want to do is find a new cup. I hope you can hear me through this thing. You should be able to. I just can't hear myself for some reason. That's weird. But what we want to do is we want to put a blindfold on and just start finding evidence. Okay, here's a piece of evidence. Here's some more evidence. Let's see if I can get it in the cup. Here's some more evidence. Okay. Oh, here's some more evidence. Let's put it in there. Now, okay, here's some more evidence. And eventually we're going to pick up all the evidence, right? And maybe get it into the cup. And then here's some more stuff, right? Okay. And we end up with a cup full of a bunch of vitamins that we don't want and a bunch of stuff that we do want. But the end result is say, hey, that's what we have. Let's figure out what this means. But the other people who don't put the blindfold on, they end up with just this. And what we as humans tend to do, when we see something that we like in a case, we take it, and what we see is this. Okay? We pick up one piece of evidence that we like, and we make a mountain out of a molehill. That's what we do as humans. It's human nature. So we don't want that. We want all of it in our basket. And we don't want to be looking at the evidence when we're doing it, because we will, single stuff out that we shouldn't, and we'll forget about other things that we shouldn't. So that's what we want in our basket at the end of the day. That's what we want in our fact pattern, as they might call it in law school. So let's look at some examples, shall we? Confirmation bias. I think it's these ones. So, example 1. Chris carried on with normal life after the murders. This is a piece of evidence. Okay, you can infer some things from it. So that's something we should consider as, that's probably a negative thing that we want if we're trying to say Chris is a bad person. Chris has only ever cursed on camera during his first confession. Psychologically, that's very relevant when we're trying to determine deceptiveness. So that's a vitamin. Okay, so let's put the vitamins over here. And let's put the Snickers bars over here. Alright. So, the next one. Chris told the exact same confession story 5 or 6 times over the course of 2 hours without a single inconsistency. I'm talking about his first confession. Most people don't think about this. This is a vitamin. This should be considered with everything else. Chris came to police voluntarily multiple times. Most people don't really give this much weight, but this is a vitamin, and we need to include it with everything else. Chris brought the blankets with the girls. This is a vitamin that people don't want to swallow, but we need to consider it with everything else. Chris apologized to police for lying not once, but twice. Another vitamin. Chris lied to the press and seemed pleased. That's one of these. We really like that. But it needs to be considered with everything else. Chris put the bodies in oil. That's a huge Snickers bar. Chris lied to police. That's another Snickers bar. But what we need to do is look at everything. So, now that brings us to number 4. Extraordinary circumstances. This is the fun part, where we get to burn stuff. So when we're looking at behavior with the intention of diagnosing, with the intention of armchair diagnosing as a layperson, one thing that can really get us is behavior under extraordinary circumstances. Behavior under extraordinary circumstances can look very similar to pathological behavior or clinically relevant, clinically maladaptive behavior. But we don't want to consider this kind of behavior because it is normal for humans to act in abnormal ways in abnormal circumstances. So when we're involved in a triple homicide case involving 2 young girls, it's very normal for otherwise moral people to make immoral decisions or to make careless, anxious decisions because it's an extremely extraordinary circumstance. This causes people to behave in abnormal ways. So we can apply that to bystanders, innocent bystanders who aren't necessarily suspects in the case. So we can apply it to other people who are potentially suspects in the case, such as Nicole Kessinger. Because she is subject and involved with this extraordinary circumstance, it is very wise to think about how is this extraordinary circumstance contributing to this extraordinary behavior that may or may not be present. So, for the example, before we go too far, when we have our unicorn here, say he's on fire. All right, he's on fire. Something really bad is happening. He's doing something that's really crazy. He is acting out. He's doing all this crazy stuff. Really bad things are happening, and this unicorn looks crazy. He's on fire, right? We need to ask not what type of fire is this. Is he psychopathic? Is he narcissistic? Is he any of these things? We need to ask what started that fire. Did he spontaneously combust? Is this fire coming from within, from his personality, from something that's wrong with this person? Or is this coming from outside? So, let's do the demonstration. And he is side heavy now because of the ketchup. So, the extraordinary circumstances. We have someone who's on fire. We need to determine, did they spontaneously combust? Or did someone come along? Did something come along? Did something happen that they didn't have control of that did this? Why is this unicorn on fire? Is it because the unicorn just spontaneously combusted for no reason? Or if we were to look further into the case, will we find that someone took a propane torch to it? Is it more likely that the reason they're acting this way is because there's a triple homicide investigation and this causes people to act strangely? So, for our last examples, killing a spouse. Why might someone do that? Is that because someone took a propane torch to you? Or is that because you spontaneously combusted? Someone who's killing a spouse is clearly on fire. Something really, really, really bad and unnatural is happening. But the question is it like our unicorn friend over here who something really, really bad happened to and they're responding to it? Or is it a case of the unicorn just spontaneously combusting because of something internal? Killing a spouse? We don't know which one it necessarily was. Hiding dead bodies. That's extremely unusual behavior that we don't expect most people to ever do. It is a person on fire. It's a unicorn on fire. But the question is, why are they doing that? What caused that flame? Did they spontaneously combust? Or are they responding to extremely extraordinary circumstances? I asked the question, how often is it that normal people find dead young bodies in their house? Not very often. So killing 2 young girls, it's extremely difficult to see how this can be a response to extraordinary circumstances. There's basically no circumstance where it is normal for someone to kill 2 young girls. This is basically has to be spontaneous combustion. So let's put that by itself. Deleting private information during a triple homicide investigation. Someone finds out that there's a triple homicide investigation and they instantly delete all the stuff on their phone. Is this someone who's just spontaneously combusted, or is this someone who's reacting to a triple homicide investigation where someone's probably going to go away and get locked up for the rest of their life? this makes people nervous. This is probably someone who had a torch lit next to them. It doesn't really matter the details. People exposed to this kind of investigation get extremely scared and anxious. It's just a normal reaction to extraordinary circumstances. Putting girls' bodies in oil after a triple homicide, is that something we know a lot about? Do we have a lot of examples of people who, through whatever events, find themselves in possession of two bodies of two dead girls? How many examples do we have of this? Can we say for certain that this is someone acting in an extremely unusual manner given the circumstances? I don't think so, because we don't have really any other examples of a father being in this position. And because this position is the equivalent of a propane torch, the fact that he's on fire, the fact that he is acting in an extremely immoral way, we can't really say that that is that's spontaneous combustion because of this extremely abnormal circumstance. So, the final one, lying regarding a triple homicide case. That's obviously a result of the propane torch. Lying to police, you could probably say, is the equivalent of being on fire, but this is obviously, at least in my opinion, the result of the homicide investigation that makes people nervous. So that's all the examples. So let's go back to MICE. M-I-C-E, maladaptiveness, isolated incidents, confirmation bias, and extraordinary circumstances. These four things, awareness of them help us weed out all of the things that can get us screwed when we're armchair diagnosing as laypeople. It's important to constantly think about these things so that we don't misuse the clinical terminology and so that we don't overdiagnose the population. If we overdiagnose the population, then we make it so that the clinical terminology no longer means anything. If 25% of the population, by the rules that we set in our investigation, would be diagnosed with psychopathy or with narcissism, then those labels don't mean much, because 25% of the population is a lot of people. These clinical labels are meant for, clinically, in the research, about 1% of the population, not 25. So we need to be careful. We need to look at it in context and say, if we were to apply this logic, not just to this one person, but to the population in general, how often would the alarm bell sound? That's what we need to be asking. And we need to use these four things to help us know how to make that alarm sound just the right number of times. Thank you.